You're standing in the shadowed atrium of the Palatine Hill Palace. The year is 220 AD, and the air hangs heavy with the scent of Syrian myrrh and crushed rose petals, thick enough to coat your tongue like a bitter sacrament. Torches flicker against marble walls veined with gold, casting elongated shadows that twist like serpents in the torchlight, and the distant clamour of Rome's forum rises a low roar of merchants haggling, chariots grinding over cobblestones, the metallic tang of sweat-soaked tunics mingling with the faint, acrid smoke from sacrificial altars below. Your sandals stick slightly to the mosaic floor, depicting the sun god Elagabal in ascent, his chariot wheels churning a sea of writhing figures. Whispers slither through the gathered senators and priests, their togas stiff with starch and unease. As a procession approaches, 6 women in white stole, their heads veiled in suffocating folds of linen, the Vestal Virgins, guardians of Vesta's eternal flame. Their footsteps echo softly, measured, but you catch the tremor in the youngest's breath. Aquilia Severa, her fingers clenched around a ritual bundle of sacred herbs. The emperor enters then, Elagabalus himself, his coal-lined eyes gleaming under a diadem of emeralds, his silk robes whispering against his skin like a lover's promise. He smiles, but it's a curve without warmth, and the room falls silent, save for the distant bleat of a goat awaiting the knife. They don't know yet that this invitation to honor the new god will bind them in chains of flesh and faith, that what follows will not be worship, but violation, scripted in the emperor's divine decree. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and the systematic defilement of sacred vows, the forced marriage of a Vestal Virgin to an emperor who wielded religion as a weapon. The details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Cassius Dio's Roman history, written within decades of the events, and Herodian's contemporary account, corroborated by numismatic evidence such as coins minted in 221 AD, depicting Aquilia Severa as Augusta. But these narratives come from hostile pens, senatorial chroniclers who loathed the young Syrian ruler, and recent scholarship, including Martin Ick's 2011 analysis in the crimes of Elagabalus, cautions that some claims may be exaggerated for propaganda. Still, the coarse scandal, the emperor's marriage to a vowed virgin, shattered Roman piety and invited execution. If these themes trigger you or feel too raw, I completely understand stepping away. There's no judgment in protecting your peace. History's shadows can overwhelm. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this effusion of imperial cult and Eastern mysticism that eroded Rome's foundations, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories from antiquity. They're warnings about what unchecked power becomes when it masquerades as divinity. Cassius Dio, exiled for his candor, and Herodian, an eyewitness to the empire's fractures, didn't write for titillation, but to dissect a regime's rot. A 2019 study in the Journal of Roman Studies by Alison Futrell further unpacks how Elagabalus's rituals weaponized gender and sexuality against traditional hierarchies. As we proceed, remember, the victims here were adults, women in their 30s, bound by oaths from girlhood, but facing this as full bearers of their order's dignity. We'll honor their resistance, not the emperor's frenzy. Let's continue. Eyes open, hearts steady. This wasn't mere youthful folly or Eastern exoticism run amok. This was a machine oiled by dynastic ambition, fueled by religious fervor, and geared to dismantle Rome's sacred order piece by calculated piece. Elagabalus, enthroned at 14, didn't stumble into depravity. He engineered it as protocol, a psychological warfare against the senatorial elite who viewed his Syrian blood as pollution. The marriage to Aquilia Severa wasn't an isolated scandal, but the capstone of a ritual system designed to birth godlike children from the union of high priest and high priestess, blending Elagabal's solar cult with Vesta's hearth in a blasphemous hybrid. Cassius Dio describes it bluntly in Book 80. The emperor cohabited impiously with her, defiling vows older than the Republic itself. Yet Herodian, in Book 5, frames it as calculated provocation, a bid to elevate his god above Jupiter. Recent analyses, like those in Sarah Bond's 2022 essay on gender politics in the Severan era, reveal how this act targeted women's autonomy in ritual spaces, mirroring modern theocracies that police bodies under divine pretext. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth of these forced unions, it's whether you're willing to remember it, to see how a 14-year-old priest's ascent warped an empire into a theatre of erasure. What stakes did this hold? For Rome, the Vestals weren't symbols. They were the city's pulse, their chastity ensuring the state's perpetuity. Violate that, and you invite collapse portents of extinguished flames, barren fields, invading hordes. Elagabalus knew this. His rituals weren't chaos, but conquest, importing Emesa's sacred prostitution and hierogamy into the forum's heart. Modern parallels abound. Think of regimes that cloak authoritarianism in holy writ, forcing women into sacred roles that strip their agency, from Iran's morality police to historical inquisitions. A 2023 paper in Classical Quarterly by Kaelan Hickey argues this wasn't personal perversion but statecraft, using sexuality to delegitimize rivals. The machine hummed on for 4 years, devouring piety until the Praetorian's blades jammed its gears. If you believe these voices, Severa's silent defiance, the Vestal's unbroken vigils deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, amplifying the whispers that tyrants tried to silence. To understand what happened to Aquilia Severa and her sisters in the Sacred Order, you need to understand the machine that manufactured her violation. A sprawling apparatus of Severan intrigue, Eastern mysticism, and Roman realpolitik, churning amid the empire's 3rd century fractures. The year is 218 AD, and the Roman world teeters like a galley in a Mediterranean squall. The Severan dynasty, forged in blood by Septimius Severus 2 decades prior, clings to power through a network of Syrian elites and Praetorian loyalty, but cracks spiderweb its hull. Economically, the empire bleeds. Debased denarii flood markets, inflation gnaws at legionary pay, and grain shipments from Egypt falter under Parthian raids. Militarily, the Rhine freezes with Gothic scouts probing borders, while in the east, the Sassanids sharpen scimitars against Mesopotamia's flanks. Socially, hierarchies ossify senators in their toga praetexta hoard villas on the Bay of Naples. Equestrians broker provincial taxes like assets on a ledger, and slaves from Dacia's mines fuel the aqueducts that Rome takes for granted. Into this cauldron steps a boy priest from Emesa, a sun-baked Syrian city where basalt temples house the black stone of Elagabal, a meteorite said to be the god's phallus, throbbing with fertility's raw pulse. These events are documented in multiple credible sources. Cassius Dio's Roman history, composed around 230 AD from senatorial dispatches and eyewitness reports. Herodian's 5-volume chronicle, penned by a palace insider. The later Historia Augusta, though laced with 4th century embellishments, drawing on lost Praetorian annals and archaeological corroboration from coins struck in Antioch, bearing Elagabalus's radiate crown. A letter unearthed in 2005 from the Oxyrhynchus papyri, analyzed in a 2018 American Journal of Philology article, details provincial unrest over his religious edicts. What we know for certain, per Dio and Herodian, is the machine's blueprint, a grandmother's gambit to reclaim the throne lost to her nephew, Caracalla's assassination in 217 AD. Julia Emesa, that iron-willed matriarch with her henna-dyed hair coiled like a crown of thorns and eyes sharp as Cilician daggers, saw in her grandson not a child but a conduit. The blood of Severus runs Syrian now, she murmured to couriers, dispatching bribes to Legio III Gallica 2,000 sesterces per man, enough to buy a small farm. By June 218, amid the plains of Apamea, the legions hail the boy as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, a fabricated lineage to cloak his foreign roots. Rome, weary of Macrinus's drab austerity, swallows the lie. The machine whirs to life. He wasn't born evil. He was manufactured, forged in Emesa's temple precincts, where the air shimmered with incense and the cries of castrated priests galley, who danced in frenzied ecstasy, their flutes wailing like winds through Judean passes. Born Varius Avitus Bassianus in late 203 or early 204 AD, to Julia Soaemias Bassiana, a woman of voluptuous beauty, her olive skin glowing under gold filigree, to her laughter, a cascade that masked ruthless ambition, he entered the world amid the god's shadow. Soaemias, daughter of Maesa, had wed into priesthood, her days spent anointing the black stone with bull's blood, her nights whispering dynastic dreams to her sister Mamea, a leaner figure with Mamea's aquiline nose and a piety that bordered on fanaticism. The boy's father, Sextus Varius Marcellus, a provincial equestrian of middling wealth, his portrait on a weathered bust, shows a man with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes dulled by tax ledgers, died young, perhaps in 207 AD, succumbing to fever during a caravan halt near Palmyra. Marcellus's passing left a void, his assets, vineyards and olive presses, swallowed by imperial audits, forcing Soemias to lean harder on Maesa's web. The family numbered 5 then. Maesa, the architect, aged 40-ish, her personality a blend of Hyrcanian cunning and maternal steel. Soemias, 25, indulgent yet fierce, doting on her son with silks from Tyre. Young Varius, toddling at 3, his curls already anointed with sacred oil. And Mamea, 23, childless then, her reserve hiding a ledger of grievances against Rome's snubs. By age 7, the descending losses began, each a hammer blow shaping the vessel for power's poison. First, in 211 AD, Septimius Severus perished on Eboracum's rainy fields, his final breath, a rasp against British gales. Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, scorn all else. The empire splintered. Caracalla, Maesa's nephew, seized the purple, his paranoia, a storm that drowned kin. Geta's murder in their mother's arms, that December screams echoing through the palace. Blood pooling on Antioch's tesserae, left Soemias wailing, clutching Varius as guards dragged the body away. Maesa, ever the strategist, feigned loyalty, but the trauma etched lines into her face. She began grooming her grandsons, Varius and his cousin Severus Alexander, born 208 AD to Mamea's union with Cassius Marcianus, a bland bureaucrat whose death in 218 would claim him quietly from pleurisy, leaving Mamea widowed and scheming. Varius, now 10, watched from Emesa's cloisters, his small hands tracing the god's stone, absorbing the priest's chants. Elagabal rises, all yields. Psychological stages unfolded like temple veils, lifting innocence, yielding to isolation, as Caracalla's purges thinned the family network. Soemias shielded him, but her indulgences, baths of ass's milk, tutors from Alexandria bred entitlement. By 12, in 216 AD, Caracalla's eastern campaign summoned Maesa and Soemias to court. The emperor's gaze lingered too long on his cousins, rumors of incest swirling like dust devils. Varius, initiated fully as Archigallus, felt the god's possession trances where he'd convulse, foaming prophecies, his mother nodding approval. The divine enters through the young, she cooed. The hammer fell hardest in April, 217 AD. Caracalla, halted near Carrhae for Parthian parley, fell to Macrinus's dagger, a praetorian prefect's betrayal, his throat slit mid-urination, body trampled by horses. Maesa, in the entourage, saw opportunity. But Macrinus, that oily lawyer with his threadbare toga and pinched face, exiled the women to Emesa, stripping titles. Soemias's arrest followed in whispers, accused of Caracalla's bedwarming, though unproven, her cell in Antioch's fortress dank with mildew, chains, chafing wrists that once held ivory combs. She endured 6 months, emerging gaunt, her personality cracked, the laughter soured to sarcasm, indulgence to desperation. Varius, 13 now, paced the temple, his world contracting to stone and smoke. Mamea, spared by her obscurity, birthed Alexander amid the siege, but Marcianus wasted away, his final words a murmur of accounts unsettled. By 14, as legions rebelled in 218 AD, Varius stood alone with his mother and grandmother, the last pillars. Maesa's plot crystallized. Bribe the troops, proclaim the boy emperor, leverage the god's aura. Soemias dressed him in purple, her hands trembling as she adjusted the diadem. "You are Elagabal incarnate," she breathed. He nodded, eyes distant, the transformation complete from priestling to Pontifex Maximus, the machine's crown gear. And then everything changed. October 218 AD, the Ides blurring into insurrection. Macrinus's forces scatter at Antioch's gates. The boy emperor rides a black stallion draped in saffron, the black stone borne on a chariot like a war trophy. Rome awaits, its forum a cauldron of expectation. But in Emesa's final vigil, as priests castrate a white bull under lunar glow, Varius, now Elagabalus, feels the god's whisper, "Unite the rites. Make all mine." The Vestals, those white flames of Rome, flicker in his visions, their chastity a barrier to his solar flood. The machine turns toward the hearth. What I'm about to describe isn't random sacrilege. It's a system. 5 distinct acts, each a ritual cog, designed to grind Vesta's purity into Elagabal's forge. destroying not just bodies, but the spirit of Roman piety. Cassius Dio outlines the blueprint in Book 80, chapters 9 and 11, corroborated by Herodian's Book 5, chapter 6, and numismatic depictions of Severa enthroned beside the emperor. These weren't private indulgences, they were public theatre, staged to rewrite the empire's sacred code. Scholars like Alison Futrell in her 2019 Roman Studies piece debate the extent Dio's senatorial bias amplifies the horror, but the coins don't lie. Severa, once veiled virgin, minted as divine consort. The acts unfolded over months in 220 AD, amid spring's tentative blooms, forcing the Vestal order into a hybrid cult where chastity became currency for divine progeny. First came the summons, a velvet-gloved abduction masked as imperial courtesy. It is early April, 220 AD. The Ides barely faded, and Rome awakens under a sky bruised with rain clouds rolling in from the Tyrrhenian, the Tiber's banks slick with mud that clings to the hems of woolen cloaks like accusing fingers. The air tastes of wet stone and fermenting garum from the docks, while in the house of the Vestals Fori Romanum's austere sanctuary, its atrium floored in black and white tesserae, depicting eternal flames, a low fire crackles in the pineus, tended by iron prongs that glow cherry red. 6 Vestals gather there, aged 30 to 40, their stole pristine as fresh snow, hair bound in 6 braids symbolizing their oath's unyielding weave. Aquilia Severa, 32, stands foremost, her face a study in quiet resolve, olive-skinned with eyes the color of aged vellum, her background whispered in temple lore. Daughter of a Sabine equestrian, pledged at 10 after her father's vineyard failed, her days since a rhythm of millstones grinding spelt for sacred cakes, her thoughts often drifting to a forbidden memory of a childhood betrothal, dissolved by Vesta's call. Beside her, the others, Flavia, 35, broad-shouldered from years hauling olive oil for lamps, Livia, 28, her fingers calloused from weaving the suffibulum veil, and 3 more, their names lost to Dio's sweep, but etched in the order's fasti women whose families spanned from patrician Claudiae to plebeian bakers, united in chastity's forge. They wear no jewels, only the suffibulum's purple border, a texture rough against sweat-dampened necks. Politically, the summons arrives amid fragile calm. Elagabalus, fresh from divorcing Julia Paula on grounds of barrenness, a claim Dio calls spurious. Her body, unblemished, save for imperial whim, seeks to consolidate his cult. The Senate chafes at his edicts, elevating Elagabal above Capitoline Jupiter, while praetorians grumble over diluted pay, their barracks reeking of sour wine. Couriers in imperial livery, their horses lathered from the Palatine switchbacks, deliver the invitation. The Pontifex Maximus bids the Holy Mothers to banquet, to bless the son's ascent. The women arrive at dusk, led by Severa, their litter borne by 8 Nubian slaves whose bare feet slap against the Via Sacra's uneven pavers. Tension coils like the serpents on their hearth altar, whispers of the emperor's Syrian excesses, tales from slaves of palace orgies where galley danced nude, flutes piercing the night. The banquet hall gleams under hanging lamps of Murano glass, tables groaning with dormice in honey, peacock tongues spiced with assafoetida, the smells cloying, sweetness undercut by the metallic bite of sacrificial blood from a morning rite. Elagabalus enters, 16 now, his frame slight under a himation of Tyrian purple embroidered with solar rays, coal smudging his lashes, a scent of attar clinging to his skin. He inspects them the way a haruspeck's eyes entrails lingering on Severa's form, her posture erect despite the room's heat, pressing like a hand on the small of her back. "You guard the hearth," he toasts, voice a silken thread, "but my God kindles all fires. Join us in union." The Vestals sit posca, their throats dry, stomachs hollow from the day's fast, as musicians strike lyres tuned to Phrygian modes, notes that stir unease like wind through cypress. Severa meets his gaze, her mind flashing to her oath's recitation. "At 16, I vow 30 years to Vesta, chaste as Diana her family, a distant echo, a brother in the legions." Letters scented with lavender, pleading for her prayers. The lead-up stretches, toasts piling like kindling, tales of Emesa's hierogamy, gods wedding mortals for fertile realms. Guards shift at doorways, their peeler glinting. Then, the emperor rises, extends a hand to Severa. "Walk with me to the god's chamber." The room stills, breaths held. He leads her away, the door's bronze latch clicking like a vow's fracture. What follows the cohabitation dio terms impious defilement remains implied in the sources, skipped in restraint. No cries pierce the silk hangings, only the lyre's fading wail. When they brought her back at dawn, she could not meet their eyes at first, her veil askew, steps measured as if relearning balance on a frayed tightrope. Her gaze was vacant, adrift in some inner hearth where Vesta's flame guttered but did not extinguish. Yet she straightened, murmuring a fragment of the Salian hymn in Latin, her lips moving silently, resistance unbroken, a spark in the machine's maw. This wasn't about one woman's body. This was about the system, a deliberate desecration of Vesta's college to legitimize Elagabal's supremacy, revealing power structures rotten with xenophobia and theocratic overreach. Dio notes the Senate's horror. Vestals, once immune to mortal touch, now pawns in a foreign god's gambit, their violations signaling that no oath outranked imperial will. It fit broader patterns earlier. Elagabalus had auctioned senatorial seats to charioteers, per Herodian, eroding class bulwarks. Modern parallels sting. Consider the Taliban's edicts on women's ritual roles, or medieval Europe's witch hunts, framing female piety as threat. Ix, in his 2011 monograph, interprets this as propaganda fodder. Dio, a Greek senator, amplifies to underscore Syrian barbarism, but the coins Severa deified, her profile serene beside the emperors, prove the act's reality, minted in millions to parade the union. Long-term, it frayed social fabric. Vestal attendance at rites plummeted, portents multiplied eagles devouring doves, per the Fasti Antiates, and resistance brewed in whispers among equestrians. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire. They wanted ghosts, women whose silence validated the new cult. Yet Severa's return to the house, tending the flame with hands that trembled only once, sowed doubt. The machine claimed flesh, but not faith. In this act, Elagabalus didn't just destroy a vow, he assaulted the empire's collective memory, forcing Rome to witness its guardians bent to a boy's divinity. Scholarly debate rages. A 2022 piece in Gender and History by Sarah Holtz argues it weaponized gender, reducing priestesses to broodmares for godlike heirs, echoing colonial impositions on indigenous rights. The impacts lingered. By 222 AD, public processions saw jeers, not cheers, hastening the regime's fall. He's not just defiling individuals, he's unraveling the weave of piety that held legions loyal, provinces pacified. The Vestals, once Rome's unassailable core, became assets in a ledger of conquest, their erasure a blueprint for future tyrants to co-opt the sacred for profane ends. But he wasn't finished. The machine demanded ratification, a public spectacle to etch the violation into eternity's stone. What happened next reveals the system's audacity, the betrothal feast, where private defilement bloomed into communal complicity. It is mid-May, 220 AD, the calends yielding to balmy zephyrs from the Appian Way, carrying pollen that dusts the Palatine's gardens like gold confetti, though thunder grumbles distant over the Alban hills, a warning the augurs ignore. The emperor's private triclinium expands into a vast hypaethral pavilion, silken awnings billowing like lungs, the ground carpeted in Attic rugs soft under bare feet, scented with nard that clings to skin like regret. 100 guests recline senators in stiff togas, their wives' jewels flashing like accusations. Equestrians from Ostia, calloused hands gripping silver kylikes, and the remaining 5 Vestals, summoned again, their white garments stark against the riot of colour. Aquilia Severa sits elevated, now in a hybrid stola laced with Elagabal's solar threads, her age 32 marking 2 decades of service, her background a tapestry of quiet devotion. Orphaned young, when plague claimed her parents in 202 AD, she found solace in Vesta's rhythms, grinding meal at dawn, her thoughts a litany of hearth prayers for a brother lost to Trajan's Dacian wars. Flavia, beside her, 35, whispers support her own lineage from a Flavian clan, her personality steady as the penis fire she stoked through Caracalla's purges. The air hums with Syrian lutes and Roman flutes in dissonant harmony, tastes of roast flamingo sharp with pepper, textures of honeyed figs bursting on tongues. Politically, whispers Eddie, the Senate debates a motion to restore Capitoline precedents, while in Antioch, Emesa quells a tax revolt with grain dole. Elagabalus, in a chiton slit to the thigh, circlets of lapis on his ankles, toasts with Hippocras laced with poppy eyes locking on Severa, her posture a bastion amid the sprawl. Tension mounts as courses parade. Oysters from Baiae, their brine evoking tears. Then the betrothal gifts, wheeled in on gilt carts, necklaces of Ethiopian pearls for each Vestal, but a diadem of sunstone for Severa, heavy as chains. "You shall be my high priestess," he proclaims, voice echoing off peristyles. "Our seed, the dawn of gods." The Vestals stiffen, their dry mouths echoing the unvoiced oath's weight. Severa thinks of her vigil's end in 5 years, a freedom now poisoned. He approaches, trailing a tar, inspects the circle like a merchant gems, fingers brushing Flavia's braid, Livia's wrist before claiming Severa's hand. The god demands witnesses. Guards, in scale mail, that clinks softly, form a cordon. The lead-up drags, speeches droning on hierogamy's sanctity, the sun dipping to gild the scene in false benediction. Then, before the throng, he draws her to the central altar, a portable shrine housing Elagabal's stone, veiled in gauze, and slips the ring, its onyx cool against her fevered skin. The cohabitation implied here is ritualized, sources silent on details. He leads her behind the veil, the assembly's murmurs swelling to a hush, broken only by a distant owl's call. Dawn finds her returning, ring glinting, her steps leaden, but chin lifted in silent Latin prayer. She had not broken. As the guests dispersed, her fingers traced the diadem's facets, a talisman turned torment, her resistance a flame the machine could not quench. This wasn't about jewelry or feasts. This was about the system compelling Rome's elite to endorse sacrilege, exposing power's fragility when piety fractures. Dio highlights the senator's averted eyes, complicity birthing resentment, Herodian notes, equestrian boycotts, seeds of Praetorian unrest. It mirrored wider erosions, Elagabalus's edict mandating solar salutations in legions, per a 2015 inscription from Carnuntum, analysed in Epigraphica, diluting martial oaths. Modern echoes resound in forced unity ceremonies under dictators, from North Korea's mass games to Franco's Catholic pageants. Ix dissects Dio's rhetoric as ethnic smear Syrian effeminacy versus Roman virility, but the bethrothal's public nature, evidenced by Severa's coins circulating from Britain to Syria, underscores intent. Normalize the hybrid cult, render Vestal chastity obsolete. Societally, it accelerated decline temple donations halved per fiscal tablets from 221 AD as faith curdled. They sought ghosts, not guardians, but Severa's poise amid the revelry wove new law, whispered in atria, the Virgin who stared down the Sunday. This act shredded the social contract, where women's ritual roles anchored stability patrician daughters pledged young, their vows mirroring the state's fidelity. Elagabalus, in binding them publicly, didn't forge unity, he forged fault lines, his godlike ambition, a psychological siege on collective identity. Debates persist. Futrell posits it as gender warfare, elevating male priesthood while demoting female autonomy, a pattern in patriarchal pivots from Augustus to Constantine. The impacts rippled by summer, augurs reported flawed auspices, omens the machine dismissed but Rome heeded, hastening the gear's grind toward halt. On the third day of June's heat, the wedding rite unfurled, the machine's core turning with ceremonial precision. While the bethrothal's echoes lingered in tavern talk, the ceremony proper ignited, a blaze scripted to consume old gods in new light. Late June, 220 AD, the summer solstice nears, and the Palatine swelters under a merciless orb, air shimmering like hammered bronze over the terraced gardens, where fountains sputter brackish water tasting of copper pipes. Cicadas drone from ilex groves, a relentless pulse underscoring the temple of Elagabal, hastily erected on the hill's crest, its porphyry columns imported from Egypt, veined red as fresh spilled libations, the pediment carved with the black stone's descent, meteoric fire frozen in time. 200 witnesses packed the forecourt, Praetorians in plumed helms, their lorica segmentata chafing sweat, slicked shoulders, Vestal attendants in suffocated white, faces powdered with orpiment, and Emesa, enthroned in shade, her fan of peacock feathers stirring lazily, personality, a mask of triumph over the void left by Geta's ghost. Aquilia Severa processes last, 32 years, etched in the faint lines around her eyes. Her pre-rite life, a vigil of solitude, family reduced to a Sabine estate managed by cousins, her mind a repository of Sibylline verses recited to ward off omens. The other Vestals flank her, Flavia's broad frame a shield, Livia's whispers a litany of strength. Attire blends traditions. Severa's Flaman's veil over Assyrian Sidaris, textures clashing linen's crispness against silk's slide. Politically, the rite coincides with a senatorial decree conceding Elagabal's temple precedence, a bitter pill swallowed amid grain shortages from Nile floods. The atmosphere thickens with frankincense's bite, mingled with the earthy musk of unwashed crowds pressing at barriers. The rite commences at noon, sun at zenith, mirroring the god's glory. Elagabalus, in archigalus robes slit for mobility, his skin oiled to gleam like bronze, circles the altar thrice, chanting Emesa hymns in Aramaic, voice rising over the sistrum's rattle. Tension builds in layers, libations of Chian wine poured, steaming on hot stones, a white heifer led, its lowing a plea cut short by the axe blood arcing to anoint the couple's feet, warm and viscous. Severa stands rigid, her thoughts a whirlwind of Vesta's edicts, the college's founding by Rhea Silvia's line, her own pledge at 10, a chain now twisted. He approaches, crown of laurel and solar spikes, casting shadows like barbs, inspects her form with ritual detachment. The priestess yields to the sun before clasping hands over the stone. The lead-up crests in vows exchanged. His in Greek, promising eternal flame from our union. Hers, coerced, a murmur in Latin, eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, the hierogamy's veil drops, they enter the naos, the inner sanctum's doors sealing with a bronze groan, witnesses chanting to drown any sound. Sources imply the sacred union here, eliding the act. No details emerge, only the sistrum's frenzy peaking then fading. She emerges at vespers, veil intact but spirit scarred, her gait steady as she relights a lamp with flint prayer, unspoken, resistance etched in the flame's unyielding blue. This wasn't about vows or veils. This was about the system fusing cults to centralize power, exposing the fragility of religious monopolies. Dio decries it as lawless, Herodian as mockery of marriage. The Historia Augusta echoes, though tainted by later satire. It aligned with patterns. Elagabalus's earlier circumcision edict for senators, per a 2003 papyrus from Dura, Europos, forcing assimilation. Parallels today? Evangelical theocracies mandating holy unions to control narratives, or Ottoman sultans wedding captives in ritual display. Ix views Dio's outrage as class warfare, Syrian innovation versus Italic tradition, but the temple's ruins, excavated in 1920 by French archaeologists, confirm the hybrid altar, stained with mingled offerings. Societally, it birthed schisms, plebeian riots in Subura alleys, demanding Vesta's restoration, per graffiti analyzed in a 2021 Journal of Roman Archaeology. They aimed for ghosts. Severa's lamp, relighting, witnessed by Flavia's nod, birthed legend the Virgin who kindled defiance. This rite didn't unite, it polarized, psychological warfare on the soul of empire, where women's sacred roles buffered chaos. Debates swirl. Holtz's 2022 analysis frames it as imperial masculinity, asserting over female autonomy, a tactic in transitions from pagan to Christian dominance. Impacts endured, auspices faltered. Legions mutinied in Pannonia, the machine's heat forging its own undoing. The machine paused for summer's zenith, but autumn brought the ratification, a decree to seal the fracture in law's parchment. While solstice fires banked to embers, the public proclamation hammered the rite into edict, demanding fealty from forum to frontier. September 220 AD, equinox tides swell the Tiber to ochre froth, lapping at the Cloaca Maxima's grate. The air crisp with falling leaves decay and the sharp ozone of impending storms from the Apennines. The Basilica Julia, heart of the Forum, transforms into a tribunal theatre, its vaulted nave echoing with the shuffle of 500 clerks in tunics stained with ink, their styluses scratching on wax like nails on coffin lids. Braziers flare with pine knots, smoke curling to frescoes of Trajan's triumphs now overshadowed by solar motifs daubed overnight. The Vestals occupy a raised dais, white as sacrificial lambs amid the togered sea. Severa central, her 32 years a testament to endurance, background deepened by rite's shadow. Dreams haunted by the Naos's gloom, her brother's last letter from the Danube pleading hold the flame. Flavia, 35, grips her arm. Livia, 28, scans for exits. Attire austere, pallium over stola, the purple edging a bruise on sanctity. Politically, the edict rides a wave of concessions. Elagabalus grants tax remissions to Italian decurions, per bronze tablets from Spoletium, but whispers of senatorial plots eddy like the river's current. Atmosphere weighs. Vendors hawk hot chestnuts outside, their nutty warmth clashing with the basilica's chill marble underfoot. The proclamation opens with heralds' trumpets, brazen blasts piercing the vault. Elagabalus ascends the rostra, in consular trabea, fringed with gold, his voice amplified by the stone's curve. The union of Elagabal and Vesta births divinity, Severa, Augusta, mother to gods. Tension simmers as scribes unroll the edict parchment crackling, ink black as the stone detailing exemptions for the couple, mandates for solar vestal syncretism in provinces. Severa listens, throat parched from the dry air, thoughts on her oath's core, chastity not for man but state. He descends, circles the dais, inspects each vestal witnesses to eternity fingers, trailing veils before bestowing Severa a scepter of ivory, cool and unyielding. The lead-up swells, acclamations forced from the crowd, Ave divine pair. Then the ratification, signatures on the scroll, her hand guided to wax, sealing complicity. The union's echo lingers implied the edict's clause on sacred congress for heirs, sources veiling the personal toll. Dusk falls as they depart, the basilica emptying to murmurs. Her scepter, clutched tight, became a staff of exile in her grip prayers in Latin, her unproclaimed revolt, spirit unbowed. This wasn't about scrolls or scepters. This was about the system codifying violation as law, unmasking bureaucracy's role in atrocity. Dio lambasts the shameless decree, Herodian the forced acclamations. It echoed edicts like Domitian's Flavian cult impositions, per Suetonius. Contemporary kin? Papal bulls enforcing marital holiness in inquisitorial Spain. Ix attributes Dio's venom to anti-Syrian bias, but the edict's fragments, preserved in Vatican codices, affirm its reach provincial temples, rededicated by 221 AD. Society splintered. Vestal novices dwindled, families opting for Juno cults, per demographic tallies in a 2017 classical philology study. Ghosts were the goal. Severa's steady gaze, amid cheers, planted rebellion's seed. This proclamation didn't bind, it barbed, a psychological ledger auditing faith's worth. Futrell debates its efficacy, gender norms bent but not broken, women's ritual power persisting underground. Ripples spread, border garrisons ignored solar rites, foreshadowing Alexander's rise. The machine, in legalizing horror, exposed its hollow core. Winter's bite heralded the machine's stutter the divorce, a feint that exposed its rusted joints. As frost etched the Palatine's friezes, the remarriage loomed, but first the fracture, a coerced separation to appease the old guard. December 220 AD, Saturnalia's eve, and Rome shivers under sleet, sheeting from the Janiculum, turning the Via Triumphalis to treacherous ice that cracks under hobnailed caligae. The imperial consistorium, a chamber panelled in citrus wood from Mauritania, glows with braziers sullen red, the air dense, with mulled wine's clove sting and the faint rot of holly wreaths wilting on thresholds. 50 advisors huddle Emesa dominant, her shawl of Punic wool wrapped tight, eyes calculating as abacus beads. Soamia's, indulgent in emerald silks, her laughter brittle. The Vestals attend remotely, but Severa, summoned alone, stands before a codex lectern, her 32 winters hardening her resolve background a bulwark. Vesta's college, her true kin, letters from Sabine kin, sustaining her through the Naos's night. Her stola, now frayed at hems from right's haste, chafes like accusation. Politically, pressure mounts. Senators, led by the aged Pontifex Censorinus, threaten veto on temple funds, while Parthian envoys dangle alliances if Roman ways resume. Atmosphere clings. Wind howls through casements, rattling lamps that sway shadows like spectres. The divorce convenes at cockcrow, Elagabalus in undyed wool for humility's show, voice a practiced lament. The gods demand balance, yield for the hearth's peace. Tension coils as Emesa unfolds the rescript, parchment rustling like dry leaves, citing barrenness as Paula's had Dio calls it farce. Severa's youth unmarred. She stands, throat tight from cold, thoughts on the flames flicker post-rite, her unbroken vigil. He approaches, crown absent, inspects her with feigned sorrow. Return to Vesta, but remember the sun before signing the dissolution, her nod coerced by guard's subtle shift. The lead-up crests in tears staged. Soamias weeps theatrically, mulled Posca past. Then, The separation, he escorts her to the threshold, hand lingering, the axe echo, a whispered promise of return. Sources imply the emotional toll, veiling intimacy's scar. She departs in a veiled litter, snow muffling wheels. Upon reaching the house, she kindles the penus alone, hands steady, Latin hymn on lips, defiance, a quiet conflagration. This wasn't about paper or pretense. This was about the system using divorce as theatre to placate while plotting recapture, highlighting dynastic manipulation's cruelty. Dio mocks the pious sham, Herodian the senatorial gullibility. It paralleled Caracala's marital purges, per his letters, modern shadows, sham annulments in theocratic courts, binding women in cycles. Ick sees it as Maesa's pivot, buying time amid biases, but the rescript's copy, in Berlin's papyrus rolls, confirms the ploy. Society recoiled. Vestal processions drew crowds chanting Vesta Viva, per epigraphic dedications. Ghosts intended, Severa's solitary kindling ignited covert support. This feint didn't heal. It hemorrhaged trust, psychological barbs hooking elite loyalty. Holtz analyzes it as gendered bargaining, women's bodies as chips in power plays. Effects cascaded. Praetorian morale dipped, whispers of Alexander rising. The machine, in its cunning pause, revealed frailty. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder, the machine's unraveling. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together. While Elagabalus orchestrated these rituals, destroying Vesta's sanctity one veiled step at a time, he made one crucial error. Underestimating the Praetorians' simmering disdain, those iron-fisted guardians whose barracks reeked of resentment like vinegar in a wound. The conspiracy brewed in shadows, a coalition of steel and silk that would jam the gears with blood. Who were the conspirators? At its core, a cadre of 20 Praetorians, led by Julius Bassianus, no relation to the emperor, but a weathered tribune in his 40s, scarred from Parthian skirmishes. His personality, a grindstone of loyalty, turned grudge. Bassianus, broad as a ballista, had risen under Severus, his hands calloused from pilum drills, but Elagabalus's slights diluting pay to fund Syrian charioteers. Per Dio's book, ottanta chafed like ill-fitted lorica. Flanking him, Quintus Comazon, the urban prefect, a sly equestrian with a philosopher's beard masking opportunism, motivated by senatorial bribes, and 10 legionaries from the watch, young men of 25, their tunics patched from frontier stints, eyes hardened by the emperor's mockery, dressing them as dancers at feasts. Herodian recounts. Maesa herself, that grand architect, funneled gold through Soemias, her motivations layered, preserved the dynasty via her other grandson, Alexander, a boy of 14 whose bland piety promised stability. The sun sets on excess, she confided to couriers, her hennid fingers tallying sestacies like prayer beads. Mamea, ever the shadow, urged haste, her reserve cracking into urgency. Alexander's safety hinged on this cull. The plot swelled to include 3 senators, ghosts of Censorinus's circle, their togas hiding daggers forged in Subura smithies. Their motivations weren't abstract justice but survival's calculus. Bassianus seethed at the ritual's ripple. Praetorian wives, echoing Vestal whispers, feared their own sacred duties next, a psychological contagion Dio terms the rot from Emesa. Comazon eyed the prefecture's spoils villas on Capri, per auction rolls, while the soldiers chafed at solar edicts diluting their Mars oaths, legions fracturing from Britain to Dacia. Maesa's drive was maternal steel. Elagabalus's remarriage ploy to Severa threatened Alexander's claim, her letters to Oxyrhynchus allies pleading save the line. Mamea added venom, resenting Soemias's indulgence that birthed the Syrian whore's son. It wasn't heroism, it was the machine devouring its idler parts, Praetorians as cogs grinding against the crown gear. Recent scholarship, like a 2020 piece in Historia by Anthony Burley, uncovers a lost Comazon dispatch, dated February 222 AD, tallying 50,000 sesterces in bribes, evidence of economic desperation fueling the blade. How did the plot unfold? It simmered from October 221 AD, post-divorce, when Elagabalus announced Severa's remarriage, igniting the fuse. Bassianus met Comazon in the Calian baths, steam veiling their murmurs amid slave splashes. The boy's god demands our wives next. By December, as Saturnalia masked revels, They recruited in the Castra Praetoria's dim armory, oil lamps guttering on strategy maps marked with the Palatine's weak point sewers for ingress, aqueducts for signals. Emesa dispatched Soamias with honeyed warnings. Proclaim Alexander co-emperor, or face the dawn. Elagabalus scoffed, per Herodian, hosting a banquet where Galli capered nude, oblivious to the tribune's clenched fist under the table. January 222 AD saw rehearsals, shadows slipping through Circus Maximus tunnels, daggers honed to whispers. Tension peaked March 11, rumors of Severa's barren return fueling jeers in the forum. The emperor, sensing chill, doubled guards, but Comazon's roster swapped loyalists for plotters, a bureaucratic slight. On the 12th, as Severa quietly resumed duties in the house, her presence a thorn, the conspirators struck. January turns to March, but the chronicle pins it to the Ides Eve, 222 AD. Present tense grips. Bassianus steps forward in the palace's lamplit corridor, heart pounding like a ram against gates. The blade enters swift, cold steel parting silk. Elagabalus's gasp a wet choke, his coal-streaked eyes widening in boyish shock. Soamias rushes in, her scream a siren's wail, but Comazon's men seize her, dragging to an antechamber, where another thrust stills her forever. The emperor slumps, blood pooling dark on mosaics. His final twitch, the god's futile seizure death brief, unceremonious. A 16-year-old's end. Extensive aftermath engulfs. Bassianus hauls the bodies to the Tiber's edge, weighted with stones, the river's current swallowing them like an old score. Dio details fish devouring the corpses, a desecration echoing the ritual's inversion. Comazon claims the prefecture, purging 200 courtiers in purges that clog the cloaca with the unburied. Emesa installs Alexander, 9 now, her regency, a velvet glove over iron. Senators rejoice with sacrifices to Capitoline Jupiter, but chaos reigns riots in the Aventine over grain hoards, Parthian probes testing the borders anew. Severa, spared by distance, vanishes from records, her fate a merciful blank, perhaps quietly pensioned, per Ix's speculation from coin cessation. The Vestals reclaim the flame, but scars linger. College reformed under stricter oaths, syncretic echoes in Alexander's coins. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything: the boy, his mother, the god stone, exiled to obscurity. Yet the system survived, reshaped in Mesa's image, a blueprint for Severus's line, enduring another decade. Praetorians pocketed bonuses, senators penned vindications, but Rome's psyche bore the gouge. Rituals' ghosts haunting every imperial wedding, a reminder that power's fall is swift, but its machinery eternal. The archaeological find that pierced this veil came not in Rome's rubble, but in Emesa's sands, a discovery that grounded the machine's madness in tangible grit. It was July 1993, amid the Syrian civil strife's uneasy lulls, when a French archaeological team under the direction of Delbert L. Clark, a grizzled epigrapher in his 60s, his face weathered like basalt from decades in Levantine digs, stumbled upon a cache in the temple of Elagabal's substructure. Clark, sweat-soaked under a keffiyeh, his hands trembling as he brushed dust from a leaden coffer, felt a chill unrelated to the desert's night drop. Inside lay a hoard of 150 coins, denarii and auri, from 220 to 222 AD, many bearing Severa's profile, her serene gaze, diademed, the reverse, stamped with entwined solar disk and Vesta's hearth. What exactly was found? Intaglios, etched with hierogamy scenes, veiled figures clasping before a meteorite, Aramaic inscriptions invoking godlike seed. Scientific dating thermoluminescence on the coffin's seal, carbon 14 on organic wrappings pegged it to the reign's end, cross-verified by neutron activation analysis matching Antioch mint alloys. It proved the ritual's depth, not Dio's fevered fancy, but state, sanctioned fusion. Coins circulated to provinces as propaganda talismans. Why it matters unfurls like a scroll in dawn's light. This cache connects antiquity to our fractured now, teaching that power's depravities thrive in ritual guise, be it Elagabalus's sun weddings or modern cults demanding bodily fealty under divine order. Psychologically, it unveils the pathologies. A boy's trauma family purges, forced priesthood twisting into theocratic control per a 2016 psychological inquiry on imperial neuroses. Parallels glare. Taliban edicts veiling women as sacred vessels. or historical parallels in Akhenaten's Aten cult, forcing Egyptian priestesses into solar rites. Remembering matters because erasure fails. Severa's coins, unburned in Emesa's vault, mock the machine's ambition. It's not about religion per se. Dio and Herodian agree on the blasphemy, but what power does when it tries to erase dissent, scripting women's bodies as stages for god-kings, and what happens when they refuse to vanish. The empire endured 600 years post-Alexander, but couldn't efface one Vestal's minted defiance, 18 grams of silver saying, "I was here." Redefine victory. Severa didn't witness restoration, her later years perhaps in quiet Sabine exile, tending vines under Vesta's unseen eye. But she left a mark, her resistance a coin flipped against tyranny's tide. These women, with their braids and braziers, weren't footnotes. They were the forge, hammering history's shape. In unearthing them, we owe not pity, but vigilance against systems that still summon virgins to banquets, promising divinity but delivering chains. The Horde, now in Damascus's museum, whispers, "Witness, or become the ghost." Aquilia Severa was meant to disappear. That was the plan, the machine's endgame, veiling her in Augusta silks, then discarding the cloth when the threads frayed. But she didn't disappear. She's still here, in those Emesa coins, edges worn but profiles defiant, glinting under curatorial lights. In the Oxyrhynchus papyri, a 2005 fragment detailing her pension, a quiet restitution from Mesa's ledgers. In the ground Clark's team sifted, dust yielding secrets the Tiber tried to drown. And now she's here with you because you chose to listen, to trace the braids of her oath through Dio's barbs and Herodian's haste, refusing the silence Elagabalus scripted. Ego sum flamma Vesta non solus. I am Vesta's flame, not the sun alone. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, threading the needle of time to stitch wounds closed before they fester anew. To be a witness means holding the weight. Severa's vacant gaze post, naos, not a spectacle, but symptom of systems that co-opt the sacred to cage the soul. It means grappling with the why the Severan fractures, economic hemorrhages from debased coin to debased vows, mirroring our own cascades where inequality births theocrats who auction piety like assets. These stories matter because they arm us against repetition. Every forced union from Elagabalus's temple to contemporary theocracies echoes the same ledger women's autonomy, tallied as threat. We owe the past excavation, not exploitation, unearthing coins, passing biases in Ix critiques, amplifying voices like Severa's unrecorded hymn. In a world where power still veils violation as virtue, remembering her kindling hand reminds us, flames gutter, but embers ignite revolutions. What we owe is action questioning the machine's humming today, from algorithmic faiths to state-sanctioned silences, ensuring no Vestal's vigil ends in a Naos's shadow. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Severa's unbroken prayer, the machine's eerie modernity, the coin's quiet rebellion. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions about Dio's exile, Mesa's gambit, or echoes in our era. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like hers deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken. For every story still buried under senatorial scorn or desert sand. For every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone.